Who are the top free agent tight ends ahead of the 2022 offseason, and how does that affect the fantasy football landscape for 2022? It's time to find out right here and right now as we close the week on Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. Come to the site. We're getting you ready for the NFL offseason. I got my big board for the draft, my latest mock draft 1 through 32, as well as my free agency rankings, and that's what we've been diving to post-Super Bowl this week. We've looked at the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. We'll close looking at the tight ends, and because we don't have a lot of tight ends there across the board, and it's a one start position there in fantasy football. We'll also look at the peripherals here, kickers that may be on the move, and other offensive non-skill players, linemen that could also affect the fortunes of fantasy football on different teams or their own team here in 2022. So we'll get into all that. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're free and available for you on all platforms. And let's dive right in, shall we, and look at the top tight ends in fantasy football available and in reality football as well. So it's a crossover. These are the best receivers out there. Number one is Mike Gesicki of the Dolphins. He had a pretty good year. Worked well with Tua Tagovailoa. He was a key target down the stretch out of necessity. They pretty much were dependent on him and the rookie wide receiver Jalen Waddle as the big sources of production there in the passing game with Tua. So Tua is probably going to lobby here with the new coach, Mike McDaniel, to try to get Mike Gesicki back. Because remember, Mike McDaniel just was with the 49ers. George Kittle was a big part of what they do. Dolphins have some good cap space, so they could go in that direction. But we've also seen them use a tight end committee approach with different guys in there. So we'll see if they make a change there at tight end. Does Gaseki look for a cash in elsewhere? But I think this is a good spot for him right now in this offense. Again, McDaniel is going to treat him a little bit like Kittle if he returns, so that's probably the way they're going to sell it to him. He's a very good hands receiver. I think he could score a few more touchdowns, and those should come as this offense becomes overall more efficient. You think the running game also will improve as well as the offensive line. That's going to help the tight end there. We know the correlation between running game and tight end production. So Gaseki, interesting name to watch here if he should float out of Miami for sure. Number two on the list is Dalton Schultz. You look at his numbers, he was a tight end one last year as well, Gaseki in fantasy. So he matched with the breakout year for Dalton Schultz and just was out of necessity. And it could be a bigger role here. The Cowboys need to decide, do they want to bring back Michael Gallup? They also have Cedric Wilson we talked about, Malik Turner when we were breaking down the wide receivers. So they have a lot of people that they need to figure out there in the passing game behind Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb to bring back. Schultz might get the nod here for Dak Prescott just because he was so valuable all over the field. He's not much of a blocker. I would say that's the same with Mike Gesicki. Gesicki is pretty much a glorified slot receiver. I think Schultz is like that as well. So they could go outside double with Cooper and Lamb and say Schultz is the guy in the middle. He's a good connection. He's a good red zone finisher as well for Dallas. So good chances for these two guys to stay, Gesicki and Schultz, but they're the two most notable fantasy football tight ends on the move there that finished really highly last season. So again, Schultz would fit in a lot of schemes. He comes out of the Stanford program where we've seen Zach Ertz and Austin Hooper be pretty effective. We'll get to Ertz in a moment and break him down here for you. That's another name on the list. But in between Schultz and Ertz, we have Rob Gronkowski. So Gronkowski is toying with the idea of playing even without Tom Brady. The things that you're hearing from the Gronkowski camp, they're just saying that he still gets the itch to play here, and he's healthy. His body feels a lot better. So his buddy Brady's gone, but Gronk still is looking at teams here. And They've talked about Buffalo. That wouldn't be the greatest spot here because they have Dawson Knox, so you don't really want to end up there. But one intriguing team he did say was Cincinnati. I know they have CJ Uzama there, and he did express he would play with Joe Burrow. And Cincinnati has a lot of money. They're the next team that could potentially get a ring. They were so close to getting one here in Super Bowl 56. So 57, Gronk could be a big part of that ability with his blocking as well. Don't forget about that aspect to help Joe Burrow. So I'm not totally ruling out Gronkowski leaving as a free agent. That's why I got to put him pretty high here. The game. I mean, he had the year off. He got refreshed, got going again with Brady, probably got the juices flowing there. The other stuff, whether it's wrestling or TV or whatever, he can put on hold here. And I think there's just a feeling that he still could be playing outside of Tampa here. So Tampa, he's not the only concern that they have at this spot here that they have to look at for tight end, but we'll get into the other guy that they have as a free agent later in the show. Number 4 on the list is Zach Ertz. He got traded from the Eagles to the Cardinals last year, so we'll see where Ertz lands up here in 2022. He's on the older side. He's been worn down a little bit, but he was very effective for the Cardinals. Finished as a pretty nice tight end, too, after it didn't look like he was going to have a big role with Dallas Goedert there in Philadelphia. So a little bit of resurrection for Ertz. Maybe he ends up somewhere where he can have a bigger role here. Maybe it's back with Philadelphia. Maybe you look at a replacement for one of these guys, Gaseki or Schultz. If one of them leaves, maybe Arizona says, look, we got another free agent tight end here in Max Williams. He's a little bit further down this list here, but Ertz may have nice value here with the connection with Kyler Murray. And you could also see him maybe in a situation like Seattle that maybe wants to feature the tight end a little bit more. So there are many ways you could look at Ertz being valued here. So he still has something left. I think it just depends on landing on the right team. Who's at Arizona, I think that's the ideal situation for him to produce and continue to produce as he gets older. Now, we'll look at one more tight end here before we take our first break. It's Evan Ingram of the Giants. So I've always liked Evan Ingram, the player. The skill set is good coming out of Ole Miss. He was a first-round pick. He had a good connection with Eli Manning early in his career, but it kind of is derailed by injuries. You just can't trust him to stay healthy. The quarterback situation hasn't helped. They've tried to do too much at wide receiver, which hasn't helped. They've also brought in another guy like Kyle Rudolph. So Ingram, there's been always something working against him, whether it's the quarterback or the offense or the wide receiver usage or other tight ends. So I think Ingram has some upside if he can go somewhere else and stay healthy, kind of like a Jared Cook has done in his mid-career once he's bounced around a little bit. So I'm intrigued where Ingram lands up here. We know that Brian Dable is more of an 11 personnel guy taking over the Giants with Daniel Jones. They invested a lot in wide receiver with Kenny Galladay and Kadarius Toney. Last year, one in free agency, one with a first-round pick in the draft. So Ingram could be an odd person out here and probably looking for a spot where he can be more effective this season and maybe crosses over to do that. And so Ingram is a guy that we're watching as one of those people that have been off the fantasy radar. He was once a promising guy, but can get back there again this season. In our next segment, we will look at the rest of the tight ends that I have on my board and my rankings there. It dries up pretty quickly, I'll tell you that. So we'll cross over and talk about the kickers too. Yeah, there's a lot of big-name kickers out there. And then we'll look at the offensive linemen that can change fates in fantasy football, whether they stay or where they go. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land. BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC, odds, right down to the Olympic coverage that's still going on and the information there. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's continue the show here and look at the rest of our tight ends of note. Gerald Everett is our sixth tight end. So we went through top 5, Mike Gesicki, Dalton Schultz, Rob Gronkowski, Zach Ertz, and Evan Ingram. I have Gerald Everett sixth. I thought he would do a little bit more in Seattle, coming with the Shane Waldron offense that was in Los Angeles with the Rams. I thought he would do more without Tyler Higbee, but Higbee was limited in his production. Everett without Higbee was also not very effective. So Everett had his moments, but nothing that was consistent where you looked at him as a fantasy football asset. So Everett, I think the Seahawks, we've tried to see tight ends work there for a long time, and it just doesn't work. Going back to John Carlson, remember him? He was a guy from Notre Dame that had a playoff game, but it was pretty good. But other than that, tight ends in Seattle, we've seen Jimmy Graham there have limited success. It just not seeming to work in the Russell Wilson era because he's a wide receiver, downfield throwing type quarterback. He's not a check down type quarterback as much unless it's designed to passes out of the backfield. So Everett in the middle of the field, he's more of an outside throwing deep ball player. Russell Wilson, so that's why it doesn't always work. So Everett may need a little bit of change of scenery here. We'll see. He might not have too many options here to be all that effective. One team I didn't mention a little bit for some of these guys that would look is Tennessee. I know they got Anthony Ferkser and some other guys, but I think they could use a more dedicated tight end to help A.J. Brown, especially with the number 2 wide receiver in flux with Julio Jones. So another team that I'm going to watch for to see if we can upgrade at tight end here in 2022. Another team we put on the radar is the Packers. We'll see about Robert Tunyon's injury. He's a restricted free agent here. So with Josiah DeGara being a little bit limited, more of a blocking type, I think that's a position to watch there. If they want to use more 2 tight end sets there with 12 personnel with Devontae Adams there, given some of their changes at wide receiver. The Browns, I think, could change up their offense a little bit. David Njoku, I don't think he'll be back there, especially with Harrison Bryant and Austin Hooper in Cleveland. So, again, Njoku is intriguing. He's another athletic first-round pick, the way that Evan Ingram was. Can he land in a good spot to get going somewhere? Maybe he's a guy that Tampa looks at as a flyer here, the kind of style of receiver. You do have some connection there to that offense. So, something to look at for sure. Because remember, Njoku was a Freddie Kitchens type player, and Bruce Arians and Freddie Kitchens once worked together in Arizona. So maybe a little sneaky play there if the Bucs move on from Gronkowski and want to get a little bit younger and have a more impact player there that has been underutilized, I think, in Cleveland throughout his career. Number 8 is Max Williams, the 2 X's, so not to be confused with Max Crosby, the defensive end for the Raiders, but Max Williams, he was off to a great start here. He was going to be Zach Ertz and a little bit more than that here, but he got hurt, unfortunately, there for the Cardinals, but they were featuring him pretty well early in the season. So he's a guy had some decent flashes with the Ravens, kind of found himself in Arizona, but still didn't get a lot of opportunities. So a guy that we're going to be on the radar for a little bit if he can get fully recovered and land with a team. Now, I think one guy I'm pretty sure the Buccaneers are going to move on from is O.J. Howard. So you could have some clarity here where Gronkowski and Howard don't return to Tampa and leaving Cameron Brate with a necessary bigger role. Remember, Antonio Brown's gone here, Chris Godwin coming off the ACL, you have Mike Evans. So it could really clear up nicely for Brate to be back to the go-to guy of the new quarterback replacing Tom Brady there in Tampa. So something to watch. But Gronkowski and Howard, along with the running backs, and Godwin, a lot of free agency concerns at the skill position beyond losing Tom Brady. And they also have some things that we have to look at offensive line. We'll get into that real quick as well. And we'll get into that in our final segment here. But first, we'll take a quick look at the kickers there of note that could switch teams. Younghoe Koo of the Falcons, he's been a pretty money guy. He was the number 1 kicker in fantasy 2 years ago. Kicks in a very favorable situation. I think the Falcons will do what they can to keep him, but again, something to watch there. You want a little bit more upside from that offense, and I think it was a little contained. That's why Koo went down a little bit. Matt Gay was very effective for the Rams in fantasy football. You'd expect he'll be back here with his team. He did a great job there. They've had Greg Zuerlein there for a long time, but he faded, so they needed to replace him, and Matt Gay was that guy. Dustin Hopkins kind of rebounded with the Chargers, but we'll see. Michael Badgley, they moved on from him, and he went to the Colts, but the Colts have Rodrigo Blankenship coming back. So you'd figure Hopkins and Badgley, one of those stepping into the Chargers situation would be very good here. Hopkins was very productive, we know, for the Washington football team, now Commanders, for several seasons. He can get back to that. Zane Gonzalez, The Cardinals' offense wasn't as high scoring last year. It's a little bit disappointing, but he is a free agent out there. Nick Folk was a machine in fantasy football. He's a little bit older, but very accurate for the Patriots there. So a lot of big names here that can put up some numbers. Randy Bullock, decent year with the Titans, but a little bit of fade there. Joey Sly, a big leg there for the Commanders that you look at. So it's a little interesting kickers. Then finally, Greg Joseph of the Vikings. So quite a few kickers out there that have some value, and kickers were pretty solid in fantasy football last year. It's kind of an interesting trend. A lot of leagues are going away from kickers. We know that in FanDuel and DraftKings, you don't get to use them either, but I think they can be interesting weapons, and maybe seeing the accuracy of these guys bounce back up a little bit and the value of these guys, and that you can be more consistent with some of these players in your lineup. But I think they'll get a little bit more love here in fantasy football, but very interesting group of kickers that you can look at. Some pretty high scorers from last season, potentially landing on different teams or staying in great situations on high scoring teams. So that's what you're going to look at. High scoring teams, they get a lot of opportunities, and all these guys that we talk about. That's why two didn't do as well as Hopkins taking over the Chargers or Gay for the Rams. And then Folk was just in a position where the Patriots were a pretty good running team. They didn't finish a lot of drives, and Folk was pretty accurate here. And he's had a big leg. We know from the past his big start with the Cowboys in this league. But that's the thing, you have to always be paying attention. The Robbie Goulds, Nick Folks, they can have those second wave of their careers kickers, and that's what we saw. So that's about as much as we'll talk about veteran kickers on this show in the offseason here on Locked On Fantasy Football. Again, we'll look at the offensive linemen of note that you need to keep track of here for fantasy football and what they can do to impact skill position players. This is a time of the year that I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. If you tried the Puffs, you haven't tried, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the best ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. And with Puffs, they've become a fan favorite because they have some incredible flavors. Yummy, cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie, also good. These are going to be your new favorites. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. That includes the Puffs, 100% real chocolate, low calorie, high protein. Replace your candy bars with these. They are better. Typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. Go to Built.com and scroll down to the macros chart. You'll be blown away. High protein, low calories, high fiber, low carbs. Most of the Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams sugar, only 4 grams net carbs, and are packed with 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which typically has 30 grams of sugar and dozens of net carbs. Mint brownie, coconut, almond, and new for this month, white chocolate cookies and cream. All these flavors are delicious here for Built Bar, and new flavors are coming out all the time. They think a flavor might be good. They'll make it, and it'll be delicious, and it'll be good for you. At Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first and figure out how to make it healthy. I don't know how they do it, whether it's a bar or puff, but they pull it off every time. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Okay, it's time to close this edition of Locked On Fantasy Football and the week here. And let's look at the offensive lineman of note that we look at. Offensive tackle, Taron Armstead of the Saints is someone we look at. We'll see about Cam Robinson there of the Jaguars and him being available. Orlando Brown is out there for the Chiefs. Dwayne Brown of Seattle that we look at. Eric Fisher of the Colts, not bad. Trent Brown of the Patriots. Morgan Moses of the Jets. Riley Reif of the Bengals. Brandon Shell of the Seahawks. Bobby Massey of the Broncos. The last guys, Moses, Reif, Shell, and Massey, more right tackle candidates. Brown can play either side. Fisher, more of a left tackle. Brown, the two Browns have been very much a left tackle. So the Bengals have some opportunity to upgrade here, looking at the line, especially if Robinson becomes an option here there for them. So good values there at this position overall. So looking to see where these teams can benefit. So good group of tackles here. Armstead can be on the move. The Saints do not have a very favorable salary cap situation. I think if one guy gets re-signed, it's probably Orlando Brown here with the Chiefs. He's did a pretty good job there replacing the combination of Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz there. They changed up their tackles. Brown was pretty effective. So we'll see. I think Armstead and Brown, by far, Brown Jr., I should say, the most desirable ones. Dwayne Brown's still playing at a high level, but very old at this stage in his career. So, again, Eric Fisher, just a guy. He's okay plug and play. So, really, if you want to impact your team pretty big, Armstead and Orlando Brown are the ways to go at offensive tackle to really get smooth pass protection there. We go to guards and centers. These guys are pretty darn good as well. You have Ryan Jensen. The Buccaneers have yet another free agent concern here. So Jensen could be out the door here, and he was tied to Tom Brady quite a bit. You have Brandon Sheriff. The Commanders have constantly given him a franchise tag. He could be definitely on the move here. So let's watch that. One of the best reliable run-blocking interior linemen in the league. So is Laken Tomlinson of the 49ers. You can plug him into a lot of zone blocking schemes and be effective. And James Daniels, one of the bright spots for the Bears. He's an interior guy that they got from Iowa, big part of David Montgomery and that running success. Andrew Norwell hasn't been to the level that he was with the Panthers in 2015. But since the Jaguars signed him, he kind of cashed in and has been pretty effective for them. They've been pretty good run blocking. Keep that in mind with James Robinson. We know the Titans have been very strong in front of Derrick Henry. Ben Jones is a free agent, their center, so something to look at there. The Rams have a couple concerns here. Austin Corbett and Brian Allen on the interior, so guard and center that they need to worry about there. Connor Williams could be replaced for the Cowboys, been ineffective for them last year. Behind Ryan Jensen, you have Alex Kappa, another interior lineman for the Buccaneers. So, and then with James Daniels, Jermaine Ifedi has been kind of disappointing, starting with his career in Seattle as a first rounder. So I think they'll move on from him. Quinton Spain was a starter for the Bengals, but I think they'll look to replace him. So I think you're not only going to look at an offensive tackle upgrade, at least on the right side, maybe to the left, and flip Jonah Williams to the right, but I think interior also has to be addressed, probably right guard here for Cincinnati to help Joe Burrow and Joe Mixon. And Mike Lewinsky, kind of a plug-and-play player that I have there. So we'll quickly go over some of the defensive standouts here. Von Miller and Chandler Jones are the biggest prizes here, but don't forget about the Dolphins and Harold Landry of the Titans. They're out there to help. They're the best edge pass rushers available. Jadeveon Clowney, it falls right out of that category. We go to defensive tackles. You have Akeem Hicks and Calais Campbell, but also B.J. Hill of the Bengals, DJ Jones of the 49ers. So those are the guys there. Linebacker Devondre Campbell had a big year racking up plays for the Packers. He's a free agent. He should be a priority for them to keep. Foyesade Oluokun for the Falcons, a lot of plays as well in IDP. We know that. Dante Hightower might be replaced here in New England. He's on the older side. I think they could look at Nakobe Dean of Georgia. That's my latest mock draft pick to them to replace. Leighton Vander Esch, we know, was a stud early in his career at IDP. I think there's an improvement waiting there. And you have Josie Jewell and Alexander Johnson, a combination for the Broncos, and Anthony Barr of the Vikings. Corners, so a lot of good ones out there. Looking at J.C. Jackson of the Patriots, his former teammate Stephon Gilmore now with the Panthers. Carlton Davis probably going to get the franchise tag for the Buccaneers. Casey Hayward still playing well at a high level for the Raiders. Tyrann Mathieu, a very versatile player there. Darius Williams probably going to move on away from Jalen Ramsey's shadow in Los Angeles there. So those are your top free agent cornerbacks. At safety, you got a couple big names here. Jesse Bates III. He was all over the field for the Bengals, had an interception of the Super Bowl. Figure he might get franchise tag to be brought back. Marcus Williams of the Saints also could be in a similar situation there. With their cap struggles, however, Williams could be out the door. So those are the two top ones. And then third one that made a lot of plays, Quandre Diggs of the Seahawks, the former Lions player. So quite a bit out there that can be effective in fantasy football, making plays, helping offensive skill players, and also helping you in IDP and defensive-minded leagues here in 2022. So that kind of sets the big picture here up for you for free agency here in NFL 2022, and kind of tells you how it crosses over here to what we were looking at in reality meets fantasy in our advanced scouting mode for Locked On Fantasy Football this offseason. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets, our gambling show hosted by your boy Q with the expert analysis of one Lee Sterling. For Locked On Fantasy Football for this week, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great weekend and see you on the other side on Monday.